I'm Morgan, 34, and I never imagined my carefully curated life would disintegrate so spectacularly. You know that Instagram perfect existence everyone pretends to have? Mine was actually real, or so I thought. James and I were that couple, high school sweethearts who actually made it. We had our life down to a science, a renovated craftsman in the historic district, Sunday brunches at Blackbird Cafe, matching monogrammed luggage for our annual trip to the Outer Banks, and professional family portraits with our daughter Zoe every fall. Basic, perhaps, but it was a life most people envied, even if things with James had become somewhat predictable. Then Elliot moved back to town. I should probably mention that Elliot was my college boyfriend. We were together for almost 3 years, intense, passionate, intellectually matched, before everything fell apart. He was pursuing his architecture dreams while I wasn't ready to be the supportive partner to someone with such all-consuming ambition. We ended things messily my senior year, and I hadn't heard from him since. When that friend request appeared on my social media, accompanied by a simple message, "It's been too long," I accepted without hesitation. We're all evolved adults, right? The past is the past. Elliot was surprisingly respectful about everything. He'd comment on our family photos with genuine warmth, ask about James in our conversations, even suggested they meet for drinks sometime. Who behaves that way with an ex? Most former flames want nothing to do with your current life. But Elliot seemed genuinely interested in being part of our circle. Initially, James attempted to appear unbothered, but I'd noticed these subtle reactions, a tightening around his eyes when I'd laugh at Elliot's witty comment on my post, or how he'd grow quiet when I mentioned bumping into Elliot at the farmer's market. James would drop these little suggestions. "Don't you think it's strange how he's suddenly everywhere?" Or, "Maybe we should establish some boundaries here." I dismissed his concerns with practiced eye rolls. "Seriously? You're threatened by someone who's just being friendly? He's literally trying to connect with you too." I insisted James was overthinking everything. Elliot is a partner at one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the city, I'd remind him. He's married to his career and traveling constantly. He's not interested in suburban drama. Besides, James had his steady job at the financial consulting firm, was a devoted father to Zoe, and rarely gave me any real challenges. Reliable, dependable, safe. If I occasionally found myself studying Elliot's profile longer than necessary, comparing his international design conferences and charity galas to James's excitement over his fantasy football championships, well, that was harmless curiosity. In my mind, James wasn't going anywhere. Where would he go? He was settled, comfortable, sometimes too comfortable. So when he'd attempt to revisit his concerns about Elliot, I'd subtly remind him of his position. "At least my ex wants to be friends with you. Most men would appreciate that kind of maturity." James would get this expression, not quite hurt, not quite resignation, but something in between. The same look he wore when I told him Elliot would be attending our neighborhood summer solstice party next weekend. But whatever, if he wanted to be insecure about it, that was his issue. I wasn't doing anything inappropriate. What I failed to realize then was how catastrophically wrong I was. But isn't that always how these stories unfold? You believe you're the one orchestrating the narrative until suddenly you're not even a main character anymore. The situation evolved gradually. Elliot joined our neighborhood social media group, commenting on my queries about interior designers or new restaurants. These interactions inevitably led to coincidental encounters at the artisanal coffee shop I'd mentioned frequenting, or at the independent bookstore where I was part of a monthly reading group. James noticed, of course. That tight smile would appear whenever I'd casually mention meeting Elliot for coffee to discuss the local preservation society I was thinking of joining, or when Elliot would send James those persistent invitations to play squash. Invitations James always found reasons to decline. "He's trying too hard," James said one evening after Elliot sent another connection request that remained unanswered. "Don't you find it strange how he's constantly inserting himself into our lives?" I laughed dismissively, as had become my habit. "God, you're being paranoid. He's just being friendly." Most men would appreciate having their wife's ex be this civilized about everything. But James persisted, noting how I'd interrupt family movie night to respond to Elliot's texts, or how Elliot had somehow become my constant reference point in conversations. Elliot's award-winning design, Elliot's fundraiser for sustainable urban development, Elliot's profile in Architectural Digest. It was becoming irritating, this constant questioning of what I considered a perfectly innocent reconnection. I'm sorry if my ex actually made something impressive of his life, while you're still at the same firm doing the same work you started right after graduation, I said, during one particularly heated exchange, immediately regretting the words, but too proud to retract them. The real clash began when Elliot posted about needing a companion for the Governor's Arts Council gala he was being honored at. I commented something innocuous. Sounds incredible, wish I could witness your big moment. That night, James confronted me with a directness that was uncharacteristic of his usually conflict-avoidant nature. You really don't see what you're doing, do you? He asked, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. How would you feel if I was behaving this way with Rebecca? Rebecca from your accounting department, I scoffed. The one who wears sensible shoes and brings homemade kombucha to office potlucks? That's hardly comparable to Elliot. He's nationally recognized, culturally relevant, actually living up to his potential. I caught myself too late, but the damage was etched across James's face. He didn't respond, just walked silently out of the room, leaving me with the uncomfortable sensation that I'd crossed a line I hadn't even acknowledged existed. Yet I still believed I wasn't doing anything wrong. So what if Elliot and I had inside jokes from our college days? So what if I saved his thought-provoking Instagram posts about architectural theory? So what if I wore my more sophisticated outfits on days I might encounter him at the Arts District coffee house? James was being hypersensitive, and honestly, his jealousy only made Elliot appear more appealing by comparison. You have to understand, I explained to my closest friend Natalie over a bottle of Barolo. James is making this enormous issue out of nothing. Elliot's literally just being civilized. He even invited James to join his sustainability committee. It's not my fault James feels too intimidated to accept. Natalie gave me a look, that specific expression I'd been receiving more frequently lately, a mixture of concern and judgment carefully balanced. Morgan, are you sure this is about James being insecure? Because from where I'm standing... From where you're standing, what? I interrupted defensively. I'm married, aren't I? I chose James, didn't I? If he can't handle me maintaining a cordial relationship with someone from my past, that's his shortcoming, not mine. In retrospect, I should have paid attention to those looks people were giving me, should have noticed how our mutual friends grew uncomfortable when I'd bring up Elliot, should have recognized the warnings when James started working later, focusing more on his physical fitness, becoming increasingly detached from my opinions and approval. But I was too invested in proving my righteousness to notice the foundation of my life, developing irreparable fractures. The following months evolved into this strange psychological standoff. James began arriving home later, spending more time at his newly joined CrossFit gym, showing less reaction when I'd mention Elliot. Meanwhile, Elliot maintained his omnipresence, sending James lengthy messages about wanting to establish a genuine connection, inviting us both to every cultural event he was involved with. It felt like he was embodying this paragon of maturity and sophistication, while James retreated further into himself. I grew bolder with my social media activity, sharing nostalgic throwback photos from my college years, carefully selecting ones where Elliot and I looked particularly vibrant together, commenting enthusiastically on all his professional achievements. Always knew you'd revolutionize the field. So proud to have been part of your journey. The engagement on these posts was gratifying, but James's silence became increasingly noticeable. He wouldn't even acknowledge my updates anymore. I just don't understand why you're being like this, I confronted him one evening after he declined another dinner where Elliot would be present. He's making genuine efforts to include you, and you're acting childishly. James looked at me with an unnerving calmness. Do you ever listen to yourself when you talk about him? What's that supposed to mean? Last weekend at your parents' anniversary dinner, you mentioned Elliot 23 times. I counted. I rolled my eyes dramatically. Oh my God, you're literally keeping count. That's not obsessive and controlling at all. You compare us constantly, he continued with that maddening tranquility. My career, my clothes, my interests, even my physical appearance. Do you think I'm oblivious or just too pathetic to notice? Maybe if you weren't so insecure, you changed your running route to pass his firm's office building. Friends exercise in the same areas. You hide your phone when I enter the room. Because you're being paranoid. I saw your messages, Morgan. My stomach plummeted momentarily, but I recovered quickly. So you're spying on me now? Really mature, James. This is exactly why Elliot is so much more. I caught myself, but James's expression told me he'd filled in the blank perfectly. So much more what? His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Sophisticated, successful, impressive. I should have stopped, but something in me needed to finish what I'd started. Bigger. James stood silently, retrieved his keys from the counter, and walked out without another word. I immediately crafted a vague but pointed social media post. Some people just can't handle authentic connections outside their comfort zone. Elliot liked it within minutes. James didn't come home that night. The following morning, my phone was inundated with notifications. Apparently, James had finally accepted one of Elliot's invitations. They were having breakfast together, just the two of them at Blackbird Cafe, our place. I felt an unfamiliar panic rising. This deviation from James's pattern of avoidance was unsettling. I posted another throwback photo of Elliot and me from our college rock climbing trip, captioned, "Some connections stand the test of time, but something felt off." Elliot didn't like or comment. James didn't react. My notifications were conspicuously quiet, as if I'd suddenly become invisible in my own narrative. I was so preoccupied with orchestrating this elaborate demonstration to James, so fixated on proving I could maintain both relationships on my terms, that I completely missed the shifting dynamic. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived, and I was standing in its destructive path. The summer solstice neighborhood party was traditionally our event. James would grill his famous cedar plank salmon. I'd prepare my signature lavender lemonade, and Zoe would play with the neighborhood children in the elaborate water balloon games James organized. But this gathering would demolish the last remnants of that tradition. Elliot arrived precisely on time, but something unexpected accompanied him, James. They walked in together, engaged in what appeared to be genuine conversation about renewable energy in residential architecture. They seemed comfortable, almost friendly, which immediately set my teeth on edge. After several glasses of rosé, the conversation among a group of neighbors turned to awkward encounters with former partners. I seized the opportunity, inserting myself into the discussion. "That's why I appreciate how mature Elliot and I are about our history," I announced, slightly louder than necessary. "We've evolved beyond the pettiness, right, Elliot?" An uncomfortable silence descended over the patio. James was staring into his craft beer, and Elliot looked uncharacteristically discomfited. That's when James spoke, quietly, but with perfect clarity, especially when you're still in love with them. The stemless wine glass nearly slipped from my fingers. "Excuse me, you heard me." James's voice remained steady, his eyes meeting mine directly. "We all see it, Morgan. Every post, every text, every manufactured coincidence. You're not subtle." Something inside me ruptured. All the careful positioning, the strategic maneuvering, the meticulous image management. It all collapsed in an instant of blind rage. "Oh, you really want to do this here? Fine, let's do this. You want to know what everyone's actually seeing? They're seeing how Elliot outshines you in every conceivable way. Should I enumerate? Let's start with the obvious. Career. He's transforming city skylines while you're analyzing quarterly reports. Home. Penthouse overlooking the river while you're excited about refinancing our mortgage. Physique. He doesn't need CrossFit to maintain his natural athleticism. Social presence. People actually seek his company at events. ambition. He's not stuck in some mid-level financial position counting other people's money. I was gathering momentum, fueled by the shocked expressions around me. Should I continue? Because I can go all night listing how much bigger and better he is than you in every category. James just sat there, a profound sadness replacing what I had expected to be anger, which only intensified my fury. What's wrong? Isn't this the honesty you've been asking for? Should I mention how much bigger his— Morgan, stop! Natalie attempted to intervene, but I was beyond intervention. No, let's be completely transparent. Elliot's bigger in every way that matters. Intellect, ambition, vision, and yes, other measurements too. Stop me if I'm saying anything inaccurate, James. Oh wait, you can't because we all know it's true. Want me to continue because there's abundant evidence of his superiority. James stood slowly, took Zoe's hand from where she'd been playing nearby, and walked toward the house. Our neighbor Diana was covering her children's ears, Natalie was shaking her head in disbelief, and Elliot, most devastatingly, looked disgusted. What? I called after James's retreating figure. You demanded honesty. I'm just articulating what everyone's thinking. At least Elliot can handle the truth. The gathering dissolved rapidly after that. As people departed, I overheard murmured fragments. Can't believe she would say that. Poor James. That was brutal, whatever. They needed to hear the truth too. Later that night, sitting alone in our unusually silent house, I messaged Elliot. Need someone who actually understands me. Coffee tomorrow. His response transformed everything. I think we need to establish clear boundaries. We met at our old haunting ground, a 24-hour diner near the university where we used to debate architectural theory until sunrise. Elliot looked different somehow, more serious, less indulgent than I'd grown accustomed to. Before he could speak, I launched my offensive. James is being ridiculous. He pushed me into saying those things. He never understood me the way you do. I reached for his hand across the Formica tabletop. Remember how connected we were? Elliot withdrew his hand as if my touch carried an electrical current. Morgan, stop. Just stop. You're married. You have a daughter. And you just publicly eviscerated your husband in front of your entire community. He deserved it. He's the one who— No, Elliot interrupted firmly. He didn't deserve any of that. And honestly, I feel partially responsible for this situation. I laughed nervously, attempting to recalibrate the conversation. What situation? We're just reconnecting as friends. Are we? Because friends don't do what you did tonight. Friends don't constantly belittle their husbands by comparing them to their exes. Friends don't orchestrate accidental meetings or send suggestive messages at inappropriate hours. I've seen how you look at me, Morgan. The comments, the throwback photos, the constant need to create triangulation. And I allowed it to continue because, I don't know, maybe I enjoyed the validation. But after witnessing what you did to James tonight, I can't be your backup plan or ego boost anymore. My chest constricted painfully. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to repair your marriage or don't. But stop using me as justification to hurt someone who genuinely loves you. You don't understand, I protested desperately. James and I just aren't compatible anymore. He's not what I need. What you need, Elliot interrupted. The man who stood by you when your father was ill? Who supported your career change? Who raises your daughter with such devotion? The one who publicly humiliated him for not being big enough? Do you even hear yourself? The diner suddenly felt over-illuminated, exposing vulnerabilities I wasn't prepared to acknowledge. So you're taking his side? Elliot stood, placing money beside his untouched coffee. There are no sides here, Morgan. Just a woman who can't appreciate what she has because she's too fixated on a romanticized past that never actually existed. He paused at the door. Try valuing your marriage instead of methodically destroying it to prove a point. After that conversation, everything unraveled with astonishing speed. Elliot maintained polite distance, not unfriending me but letting my messages languish unread, declining my lunch invitations. James transitioned to communicating exclusively through his attorney. a woman whose crisp efficiency made my situation feel all the more dire. I began posting cryptic social media updates about people revealing their true colors and knowing your authentic worth, but the engagement these usually received had diminished significantly. My follower count was decreasing daily. Even Natalie, my supposed closest confidant, had become critical. "You need professional help, Morgan," she said during our last conversation. "What you said at that party wasn't just mean-spirited, it was deliberately cruel. And now you're behaving like you're the victim in all this." I attempted to minimize the situation. Everyone's become so hypersensitive. I simply expressed some hard truths. "The truth?" Natalie looked incredulous. "The truth is you've been obsessing over your ex and systematically dismantled your marriage to satisfy some unresolved fantasy. And for what? Elliot doesn't want you either." That assessment stung profoundly, but rather than acknowledging its accuracy, I doubled down, posting more nostalgic images, sending additional messages that remained unanswered, attempting to engineer encounters with Elliot at his regular locations. But he had altered his patterns, becoming as elusive as he had once been omnipresent. Meanwhile, James's attorney delivered divorce papers, and suddenly this wasn't an abstract exercise in attention-seeking. It was a legally documented dissolution of my entire life structure. I had assumed I would retain the house and the settlement, or at minimum primary custody of Zoe, perhaps substantial support payments. But karmic retribution proved remarkably efficient. The judge reviewing our case seemed distinctly unimpressed by my position. Those social media posts provided comprehensive documentation of emotional manipulation. The summer solstice incident inspired multiple community statements testifying to my behavior, and my persistent communication with Elliot, with timestamps of those late-night messages, significantly undermined my credibility. Now I'm residing in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, while James received primary custody of Zoe. The support payments barely cover basic necessities, as the court determined he represented the more stable parental influence. I'm permitted supervised visitation weekends, supervised, as if I represent some category of potential harm. Meanwhile, James is flourishing, promoted to senior financial strategist, purchased property in that exclusive new development with the prestigious school district, and began a relationship with Cassandra, a marine biologist who teaches at the university and whom Zoe absolutely adores. "She's teaching me about ocean conservation, Mom," Zoe informed me during our last visitation. "And she helps me with my science projects. She says Dad is amazing with numbers and research methods too. The universe seems determined to amplify my humiliation at every opportunity." Elliot maintains civil interactions during unavoidable community encounters, but there's a palpable remove that wasn't present before. He's dating an environmental lawyer who resembles a sustainable fashion model. They collaborate on community-based green architecture initiatives and appear disgustingly compatible. I discovered through mutual connections that Elliot once commented to a colleague, "Morgan taught me an invaluable lesson about respecting established boundaries." Wonderful. Delighted my personal catastrophe could contribute to his emotional growth. Everyone in our social circle seems convinced I received precisely what I deserved. Natalie explicitly stated, "You manufactured this crisis and lost everything essential." My own mother expressed sympathy for James, commenting on what an exceptional father he is and how fortunate Zoe is to have Cassandra's positive influence. Even my therapist, whom I only consulted because the court strongly recommended it, persistently encourages me to examine my patterns of triangulation and validation-seeking behaviors. But here's what they don't comprehend. I challenge James to become his better self. All those comparisons to Elliot motivated his transformation. That summer solstice confrontation finally inspired him to advocate for himself. If he had embodied this version of himself during our marriage, confident, accomplished, authentically self-possessed, I wouldn't have continuously looked backward at what Elliot represented. The most devastating moment occurred last week during Zoe's science fair. James and Cassandra arrived looking like they'd stepped from the pages of a modern parenting magazine. He's transformed physically, more defined, better posture, wearing clothes that actually complement his frame. He seemed somehow more substantial, not in physical dimensions, but in presence, in the confidence with which he occupied space. He didn't display any discomfort around me. Cassandra even offered a genuine smile, completely unthreatened by my existence. Meanwhile, I'm still examining both their profiles at inappropriate hours, witnessing their lives improve exponentially while I remain suspended in relationship limbo. My recent dating attempts have been disastrous. The last 3 prospects disappeared after researching me online. Apparently, the summer solstice incident has become legendary in local social circles. Perfect. So that's my current reality. Single, essentially displaced, observing my ex-husband thrive, while my former flame refuses to acknowledge my existence. Everyone insists I need to focus on personal development before attempting another relationship, but they fundamentally misunderstand. I didn't lose James because of unresolved feelings for Elliot. I lost them both because neither could manage my unfiltered honesty about comparative realities. At least that's the narrative I recite to myself at night, alone in my apartment, while James creates his ideal life and Elliot posts images from international design conferences with his environmentally conscious partner. But occasionally, in those vulnerable moments between consciousness and sleep, I consider whether perhaps, just perhaps, I orchestrated my own downfall through insecurity disguised as superiority, through fear masquerading as honesty, through a desperate need to be the center of a drama that ultimately left me without any significant role at all. Not that I would ever articulate such a possibility aloud. Some admissions remain too costly. Even when you've already lost everything else,